Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia channel. This program will explain to you a classic work in the field of psychology. The title of the book is Harvard Happiness Lesson. How classic is this book? It was first published in 2006, and it immediately appeared on the New York Times bestseller list. In 2007, it won the Royal Society Science Book Award and was included in the series of 50 classic works on psychology. So far, it has been translated into more than 30 languages. It can be said that whether it is evaluated by academic standards or public standards, this is a good book. So, what is this book really about? In fact, its key word is emotional prediction, that is, to predict whether the future emotion will be pain or happiness. It sounds like there is nothing to say about this question, because when good things happen, people are naturally happy, but when bad things happen, who doesn't suffer? After watching this video, you can understand why. But this is actually an illusion. This illusion is that we cannot predict exactly what will happen in the future, but we are very sure of our emotional state. For example, we may have all had this thought: if I win 10 million, I must be so happy and live a happy life from now on, or if I break up with my lover, I must be so sad. See it? We're not sure if we're going to hit the jackpot or we're going to break up, but we seem pretty sure about our emotional reactions. But this book will break this illusion from a scientific point of view and reveal the fact that we are always keen to imagine future happiness or misfortune, but this emotional prediction is often inaccurate. In this way, a series of related questions arise. Why are we keen on forecasting? What are the reasons for inaccurate forecasting, and can it be corrected? More importantly, is there any point in pursuing happiness? See how this book answers. The author of this book is Daniel Gilbert, a professor of psychology at Harvard University, who is mainly known for his research on emotion prediction, for which he received the Outstanding Scientific Achievement Award from the American Psychological Association. The reason why Gilbert studies emotional prediction is related to his personal life experience. Around 1993, he encountered the most painful thing in his life. His mentor and mother passed away one after another, he divorced his wife, and his son also had problems in school. A year later, when he talked about this experience with his colleague and friend, the psychologist Wilson, he realized that he thought that these major blows would cause him to be in constant grief, but now the situation is not as bad as expected. This phenomenon inspired his and Wilson's research interest, and jointly created the academic term emotional prediction. Now, Gilbert has become an expert in the field of emotional forecasting, and tirelessly educates the public about related knowledge, and this book is a model of it. Next, let's take a look at the main content of this book. Why are we so persistent in imagining the future, especially predicting future happiness? Why is it always wrong? Why is it difficult to correct, always making mistakes again and again? First part. Why are we so persistent in imagining the future? What is the essence of happiness? In the 1960s, a professor of psychology at Harvard University named Ram Dass resigned and went to India to learn how to stop and not think. He declared that the key to happiness is to stop thinking too much about the future, and he wrote a book called Living in the Now. So, can we not imagine the future? Gilbert, the author of this book, believes that this is impossible, unless the frontal lobe of the brain is broken. Otherwise, asking to stop thinking about the future is as absurd as asking the heart not to beat. Because humans have a brain area that no other animal has, that is, the frontal cortex. One of the most important functions of this special brain area is to think ahead and predict the future. Therefore, the typical symptom of patients with damage to the prefrontal lobe of the brain is that they cannot imagine the future. Relatedly, the destruction of some frontal lobe tissue has become a routine treatment for depressed and anxious patients who feel hopeless and fearful about the future when other treatments have failed. These facts show that when it comes to predicting the future, it is not a question of whether we like it or not, but we must imagine it. The prefrontal lobe of the brain is the physiological basis for imagining the future. This is an analysis of why we are keen to imagine the future from a neurobiological perspective. How does psychology explain this issue? Gilbert analyzed this question from two perspectives: pleasure and control. First, he believes that imagination itself is a pleasant thing. For example, scientists have done such an experiment, asking people to imagine that they have obtained a coupon for free dining in a luxury restaurant, and asked when they would like to enjoy this delicious meal, now or tomorrow. Many people put off enjoying it, usually until a week later. So, the question is, why do people put off big meals? A big meal or that big meal, whether you enjoy it now or next week, objectively speaking, the sense of satisfaction that this big meal brings is the same. So there must be other reasons why people put off big meals. The reason, Gilbert says, is that, before next week, people can also increase their happiness by imagining good things that are about to happen. In other words, this kind of happiness is purely brought about by imagination. Of course, we also imagine terrible things. Although this kind of anticipation is unpleasant, it has two functions. On the one hand, it warns us not to act rashly and be careful to sail for thousands of years, be mentally prepared. Therefore, the psychological factor of pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain makes us eager to imagine future happiness or unhappiness. According to Gilbert, another psychological factor behind this fascination with imagining the future has to do with a sense of control. When we imagine the future, we actually want to control it. So why would we want to control the future? First of all, this is human nature, and people are born with a desire to control. When a child pushes down the built blocks, he has no other intentions, but just wants people to know, look, this is what I did, and I want it to fall, so it has to fall. Second, a sense of control is closely related to physical and mental health, and studies of elderly people in nursing homes have shown that loss of control can have serious consequences. This study is like this. The researchers sent potted plants to the elderly in nursing homes, and told half of them that the potted plants would be taken care of by them, and told the other half that the staff would help them take care of the potted plants. After 6 months, 15% of the elderly who took care of the bonsai by themselves died. In contrast, 30% of the elderly who took care of the bonsai by the staff died. Therefore, control is not only human nature, but also related to physical and mental health. But how do you gain a sense of control? Beyond knocking down blocks and caring for potted plants, that's imagining the future. In imagining the future, the mere fact that I am at the helm of my ship makes one feel good, whether the goal will be achieved or not. The prefrontal lobe of the brain forces us to imagine the future, and the sense of pleasure and control makes us eager to picture the future. So, what are we pursuing for the future? The answers may be strange, but all of them can be summed up in one sentence, that is, the pursuit of happiness. Gilbert said that everyone is after happiness, and anyone who says no is lying. So what is happiness? Another difficult question to answer. Seligman, the father of positive psychology, said in the book True Happiness that there are too many definitions of happiness, and he doesn't want to add another one. The author is also very smart. He said that whether people define happiness as personal self-realization, family responsibilities, or social contributions, in the final analysis it is a subjective and inner pleasant feeling. No matter whether the cause of this feeling is noble or base, deep or superficial, they correspond to roughly the same neural activity. Happiness is a pleasant feeling. Gilbert's sharp explanation can solve many myths about happiness. For example, what kind of happiness do you want to pursue? Is happiness real or fake? Is there a difference between high and low in happiness? In the long history, people usually equate happiness with wisdom, virtue, hardship, dedication, and so on. Philosopher Mill once wrote, "It is better to be a dissatisfied man than a contented pig, and to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a contented fool." Philosopher Robert Nozick said, "Some people's emotions are based on extremely irrational and incorrect evaluation criteria, so no matter how wonderful their self-feeling, we are reluctant to call this feeling happiness." For these views, Gilbert believes that they all make the same mistake, which is to confuse cause and effect, and equate the method of achieving happiness with happiness itself. Gilbert made a vivid analogy. He said that pricking a finger with a pin and stimulating a specific area of the brain with an electric current have different causes for the pain. The electrical stimulation is called pseudopain. In the same way, happiness is essentially a pleasant feeling, neither high nor low, nor true nor false. Well, this part is about why we are keen to imagine the future, and what is happiness. Gilbert analyzed it from the perspectives of neurobiology and psychology. The frontal lobe of the brain makes us inevitably imagine the future, and the sense of pleasure and control makes us happy to imagine the future. Happiness is essentially a subjective, pleasant feeling. Everyone pursues happiness and predicts the future emotional state, but it is usually not accurate. Why? The second part. Why do we keep getting it wrong when predicting future emotional states? Gilbert said that only humans have the prefrontal lobe of the brain, so only humans can imagine the future and create the future. Indeed, smart sparrows still live in the ancestral house that has remained unchanged for thousands of years, while human beings have created things that did not exist in this world based on their wild imagination. The imagination is great, but it is also full of loopholes. Gilbert summed up 3 shortcomings of imagination, and it is these 3 shortcomings that lead to people's biases in predicting the future and predicting future emotional states. Gilbert called the first defect of imagination fillings and omissions. That is to say, the imagination will embellish the information that is prompted and ignore the information that is not prompted. Let's talk about adding oil and vinegar to imagination first. For the convenience of understanding, let's make an analogy. There is a blind spot in our eyes where we cannot see at all, but our vision will quickly fill in this blind spot based on the surrounding information, so that the picture we see is complete. In addition to visual filling, hearing can also be filled, and the frontal lobe of the brain, which is good at imagination, is a master of filling. For example, please imagine pizza now. I bet that when the simple word pizza enters your mind, your brain immediately imagines a delicious pizza. However, saying, "Wow, that's great." The filling feature of imagination, which causes trouble for predicting future emotional states, is not in adding oil and vinegar when filling in. After all, this is the housekeeping skill of imagination, but in silently filling in, just like vision fills in blind spots, we don't realize it at all. This can lead us to make inappropriate emotional projections by taking for granted what we imagine as a perfect representation of reality. So what does the omission of the imagination mean? This is related to our cognitive characteristics. When we recognize things, we will pay attention to the things that currently exist, and seldom pay attention to the things that do not currently exist. Let's take an old and classic experiment. Many years ago, researchers asked some Americans, which 2 countries are more similar, Ceylon and Nepal, or the Federal Republic of Germany and the Democratic Republic? Most people chose the Federal Republic of Germany and the East Germany. However, when asked which 2 countries are more different, most people still choose the Federal Republic of Germany and the East Germany. How is this possible? Since they are the most similar, they cannot be the most different. However, our cognitive process has such a characteristic that when we ask about similarity, we think about similarity, and it is difficult to think of difference. Conversely, when we ask about difference, we think about difference, and it is difficult to think of similarity. Our imagination suffers from the same fault when it predicts the future. Gilbert did a special survey of people who knew him, asking how their second year would feel if their child died unexpectedly. Except for those who refused to answer because they thought the author was crazy, none of the people who did answer said anything other than heartbroken. But the obvious fact is that in 1 year, many things will definitely happen, such as reading books, traveling, visiting relatives and friends, etc., and these things are bound to arouse different emotions. Therefore, how can it be as people predicted? As in, only heartbroken? Filling in and leaving out is the first defect of imagination. What is the second defect of imagination? Gilbert said that imagination follows the principle of reality first, and it is the prisoner of reality. What does it mean? What does that have to do with predicting future emotional states? The author first asks us a question: what is imagination? The author said that imagination is seeing. We use our eyes to see the real world, and similarly, we use our conscious eyes to see imaginary things. For example, by comparing the length of the tails of cats and dogs through imagination, the brain will soon flash the picture of cats and dogs. It is very likely that we will close our eyes, look at this picture through imagination, and draw conclusions after comparison. Here comes the key point: seeing imaginary pictures in the mind and seeing real pictures with the eyes. These 2 pictures activate the same brain area. Please note that the same brain area is activated, so what if you want to watch it and I want to watch it too? Who does the brain prefer? It will prefer reality, and furthermore, it will mistake the feeling of reality for the feeling of the future, which makes our predictions inaccurate. For example, a friend invites you to watch a movie tomorrow, but the unpleasant feeling caused by a punctured bicycle tire just now will make it difficult for you to imagine how enjoyable it will be to watch a movie tomorrow. Finally, we come to the third defect of imagination, which is its inability to imagine what we would think if things actually happened. Gilbert first complained about a mental illness, which is sadness deficiency disorder. What kind of illness is this? That is to say, people who have suffered major accidents or blows, such as the instant loss of wealth and the loss of the love of their lives, if this unlucky person does not show pain, sometimes he will be diagnosed as sorrow deficiency disorder and can be cured. Fortunately, the ancient man whose wife died and knocked on the basin and sang lived in ancient times, otherwise he would have suffered a lot. And luckily, Gilbert has bucked the entrenched belief that it's perfectly normal to be sadly absent. So, why do people make mistakes in their predictions, and then turn around and say that others are abnormal? This is mainly because the imagination cannot imagine the feeling after the thing actually happened, and after the thing happened, it is difficult to imagine the feeling before the thing did not happen. As complicated as it sounds, Gilbert gave an example, saying that people often think that conjoined twins have miserable lives, so when conjoined twins say they are doing well, people say they are either lying, either do not know the taste of happiness. But in fact, what qualifications do people who are not conjoined twins have to evaluate the feelings of conjoined twins? Conversely, once conjoined twins are separated, they can no longer experience what they felt before they were not separated. Therefore, when they are separated, people say that it is better to be separated than not to be separated. It is also a kind of you are not them, how do you know how they feel? In the same way, the so-called sorrow deficiency disorder also makes the same mistake. This part is talking about the three shortcomings of imagination, which make us deviate when predicting future emotional states. The first is filling and omission, the second is the principle of reality first, and the third is that imagination cannot imagine things what will change in our minds after it happens. Since it is so unreliable to rely on imagination to predict future emotional states, is there any way to correct it? Gilbert said there are ways, of course, but it is still difficult to fix, otherwise this phenomenon would not have occurred. For example, today I vowed never to eat supper again, and I will continue to swear tomorrow. Another example, I made up my mind never to date such a boyfriend or girlfriend, but later found that they are always the same. Why is this? The third part. Why is it difficult for us to correct the bias of emotional prediction, and we always make mistakes again and again? What methods do we generally take when correcting sentiment prediction bias? Gilbert said that there are usually two methods, one is to seek experience from history, the other is to seek experience from others. Let me talk about the first method first, to ask for experience from history. If this method is to be effective, it must be ensured that the history being remembered is conducive to our learning from history. Unfortunately, our memory does not care whether it is beneficial to us or not. It has its own set of memory rules. Therefore, what is remembered may not be what we want. For example, we want to know which things happened frequently in the past. If we recall them, the ones that pop up in our minds may be the most frequent ones. Otherwise, why do we remember them? But the truth about memory is that it has nothing to do with who is easy to remember and who is rare. First of all, who is easy to remember? The researchers asked people to recall more words starting with the letter K in English words, or more words with the letter K in the third position. People usually say that there are more words starting with K, but this answer is wrong. Why did it go wrong? This is because, when recalling, words beginning with K are easier to remember, but this does not mean that there are more words beginning with K. Besides, remember whoever is rare, this refers to the magical phenomenon that queuing always delays. The author said that he found that no matter what kind of team he was in, the team he was in always moved the slowest. When he told his friends about his troubles, they all rushed to say, "Oh, me too, oh, me too." What is the reason? Gilbert believes that this has something to do with memory. When we are in a slower line, we will pay attention to how the line next door is so fast, and how the old lady in front has so deep in her wallet than the one behind me. Everyone is gone, it's really a boring torture, why is it always me? Our memory registers hastily, and accidental events become inevitable. For another example, We think that what we remember is the overall feeling about an event, but the truth of memory is that whoever laughs last will remember who. For example, the researchers asked a group of students to participate in two experiments, one long and one short. The short experiment was to let the students soak their hands in 14-degree ice water for 60 seconds. The long experiment was to let the students soak their hands in 14-degree ice water. 60 seconds in water, then soak in ice water at 16 degrees for 30 seconds. At the end of the experiment, which experiment was more painful for the students to evaluate? Which experiment would they prefer to repeat if they had to do it all over again? Guess what happened? Most students said that the short experiment was more painful, and 69% would prefer to repeat the long experiment if they had to do it again. Isn't it weird? In terms of the total amount of pain, the long experiment of soaking in ice water for 90 seconds is more painful. If we remember the overall feeling, we will say that the 90 seconds is more painful, but what we remember is the ending. In 90 seconds for the last 30 seconds of the long experiment, the water warmed up a little, to a more comfortable 16 degrees. But in the short experiment of 60 seconds, it was always a cold 14 degrees. So, we think the short experiment of 60 seconds is more painful. How irrational! A person who has been doing good things all his life will usually be spurned by others if he does a bad thing in the end, while a person who has been doing bad things all his life will usually be forgiven if he does a good thing in the end. Shakespeare's description of this is simply penetrating. He said, "Just as the setting sun in the evening, the aftertaste at the end of the song, and the last sip of fine wine leave people with the warmest memories, a person's ending is always better than his." Everything in life is extraordinarily compelling. Going back to the topic, from the above analysis, we can see that due to memory reasons, relying on historical experience to correct future predictions is sometimes unreliable. What about asking others for experience? Studies have shown that random sampling of other people's individual experiences is far more reliable than our imagination's predictions. However, we usually do not use this method well. Why? Gilbert analyzed it from two perspectives. First of all, we are generally unwilling to refer to other people's experience and always think that we are unique. How can we predict my experience based on other people's experience? This illusion of our own uniqueness blinds us to the fact that we have far more in common with others than we do with individuality. It is for this reason that we can empathize with others and seek sympathy. Important commonalities are ignored, unimportant differences are firmly remembered, so that although reference to other people's experience is more reliable than predictions from the imagination, we still stubbornly insist on our own opinions and go wrong along the way. On the other hand, some misconceptions that are widely circulated and regarded as traditional wisdom may become our reference. For example, wealth can bring happiness and money can bring happiness. These concepts are not only the life creeds of many people, but also the basis for the formulation of modern national policies. But two inescapable realities cast doubt on the validity of these notions. The first fact is that there has been unprecedented growth in wealth in many countries, but people's happiness has not increased. The second fact is that after a certain level of personal wealth, happiness stops increasing. It can be seen that the concepts of wealth can bring happiness and money can bring happiness are not accurate, but so what? These ideas still live on. Gilbert analyzed that ideas are widely spread either because they are correct, or they may have nothing to do with being correct simply because they reproduce themselves. What does that mean? For example, the idea that raising children can bring happiness drives people to pursue happiness and raise children. As a result, the population multiplies and this idea spreads. On the contrary, the idea that raising children does not bring happiness drives people not to raise children. As a result, the population is getting smaller and smaller, and this concept has gradually disappeared. Therefore, the concepts passed on by people are not correct concepts. When we use these concepts as a reference to predict future happiness, deviations will inevitably occur. Is it a bit frustrating? I don't want to imagine, but I can't stop. Imagining the future is full of loopholes. I want to correct it, so I turn to memory, but the experience provided by memory is not necessarily reliable. I turn to others, and we don't want the experience provided by others. A group of people commonly offered experiences can be wrong again. Therefore, there is really no way to predict accurately, not even Socrates. However, Socrates was a wise man who said that the only thing he knew was that he was ignorant. Things are so weird. Knowing that one is ignorant is actually a kind of wisdom. Then, knowing that it is difficult to accurately predict happiness is not necessarily a blessing. After explaining so much, the main content of this book is about the same. Let's finally review the 3 key points. First, the frontal lobe of the brain makes us have to imagine, and the sense of pleasure and control makes us happy to imagine. Happiness is essentially a subjective feeling of emotional pleasure. Second, the inability to accurately predict future emotional states is mainly related to 3 shortcomings of imagination. The first is filling and leaving out, the second is the reality first principle, and the third is the inability of the imagination to imagine how things will change after they happen. Third, it is difficult to correct for bias in predicting future emotions, for 2 reasons. One is that learning from history is ineffective due to inaccurate memory, and the other is that we are either unwilling to listen to other people's experiences or have widespread false beliefs convinced. The above is the main content of the book Harvard Happiness Lesson. Gilbert is an expert in the field of emotional prediction, the study of why people cannot accurately predict future emotional states. In this book, he uses a lot of cases to demonstrate his point of view, and uses one question after another to advance the deepening of the problem, and the conclusions he draws seem to be common sense. For example, imagination is defective, memory is unreliable, happiness is a feeling, and it is necessary to refer to other people's experience, etc. But what is common sense? Common sense is like a luxurious prison. When we enjoy it, we cannot realize its confinement to thinking. To break this confinement, we need to ask a few more reasons about common sense, rather than take it for granted. This is exactly what Gilbert worked on in this book. Therefore, this book focuses on analyzing problems rather than providing solutions to them. If you want to learn how to improve your own happiness, you can refer to Seligman's Authentic Happiness and Sustained Happiness, 2 books. In A Brief History of the Future, the author Yuval Noah Harari listed happiness as one of the 3 goals of the future society, and believed that this is more difficult than immortality. However, the author of this book believes that happiness is actually very simple. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.